The morning Victoria told Marcus he wasn't good enough for her anymore, he was making her favorite pancakes. He had woken up at dawn to prepare the blueberries just the way she liked them, arranging them in perfect little circles on top of the golden batter. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and butter, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Then she walked downstairs in her silk robe, took one look at his efforts, and said the words that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus, we need to talk. I've been thinking, and honestly, I deserve better than this. Better than you. She didn't even sit down, just stood there by the kitchen island, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the marble countertop, while Marcus stood frozen with a spatula in his hand, watching 23 years of marriage crumble in real time. Marcus Caldwell had always considered himself an ordinary man living an extraordinary life. At 51, he was the kind of husband who remembered anniversaries, who brought home flowers on random Tuesday afternoons, who had spent the better part of 2 decades building a comfortable existence for his family in the affluent suburbs of Millbrook Heights. He worked as a senior accountant at Henderson Associates, a respectable firm where he had climbed the ladder one careful rung at a time. His days were predictable, his income steady, his lawn perfectly manicured. Victoria, his wife of 23 years, had once called this stability romantic. She used to say that Marcus was her anchor, her safe harbor in a chaotic world. That was back when they lived in their first apartment, a cramped 2-bedroom place where they shared dreams over instant ramen and planned their future with the optimism of 2 people who believed love could conquer anything. But somewhere along the way, stability had become stagnation in Victoria's eyes. The safe harbor had become a prison. The signs had been there for months, Marcus realized later, but he had been too comfortable, too trusting, too naive to see them. Victoria had started working out religiously at an expensive gym downtown, claiming she needed to take better care of herself now that she was approaching 50. She had begun shopping for clothes that cost more than their monthly grocery budget, explaining that she deserved to look her best. She had started coming home later from her job at the marketing agency, always with reasonable excuses about client meetings and project deadlines. Most telling of all, she had begun talking about their friends' divorces with a strange mixture of envy and fascination. "Did you hear about Rachel and Tom?" she would say over dinner. "She's already dating someone new, a doctor, apparently, very successful." Or, "Jennifer looks incredible since her separation, 20 pounds lighter and 10 years younger." Marcus had attributed these comments to midlife curiosity, the natural result of watching their social circle navigate the choppy waters of middle-aged marriage. He never imagined that Victoria was studying these breakups like a student preparing for an exam, learning the patterns and possibilities of what came after. The morning of the pancakes, Victoria had been unusually quiet during her coffee, scrolling through her phone with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for work emails. Marcus had interpreted her silence as tiredness, maybe stress from a difficult client. He had decided to surprise her with breakfast, thinking that a small gesture of love might brighten her mood. Instead, she delivered the verdict that would shatter his world. "I deserve better than this. Better than you." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire neither of them had seen coming. Marcus set down the spatula and turned to face his wife fully, searching her expression for some sign that this was a joke, a bad dream, a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by too little sleep or too much wine the night before. But Victoria's face was composed, almost serene. She had clearly been planning this moment, rehearsing these words. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore the kind of expression people adopt when they've made a difficult decision and found peace with it. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew. Part of him had been dreading this conversation without even realizing it. Victoria sighed, as if his question was evidence of yet another way he disappointed her. "I mean exactly what I said, Marcus. I've been thinking about our life together, about what I want for the next 20 years, and this isn't it. You're a good man, but you're not the right man for me anymore." She moved to the coffee maker and poured herself a fresh cup, her movements casual and unhurried, as if she were discussing weekend plans rather than the end of their marriage. I need someone who challenges me, who excites me, someone who has ambition beyond just paying the bills and maintaining the status quo. I need someone who matches my energy, my drive. Marcus felt something cold and heavy settle in his chest. And I don't match your energy? Honestly, no. Victoria turned to face him, leaning against the counter with her coffee cup cradled in both hands. When was the last time we did something spontaneous? When did you last surprise me with something more adventurous than breakfast in bed? You're comfortable, Marcus, but comfortable isn't enough anymore. The pancakes were burning on the griddle, filling the kitchen with the acrid smell of charred batter, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to move. He stared at the woman he had loved for more than half his adult life and realized he was looking at a stranger. So what are you saying? You want a divorce? I'm saying I want a separation. I need space to figure out what I really want. I need to explore who I am when I'm not defined by being Marcus Caldwell's wife. Victoria's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if she were explaining a business decision rather than dismantling their family. Marcus finally turned off the burner and moved the ruined pancakes to a cold plate. The simple action gave him something to do with his hands while his mind struggled to process what was happening. And what about Emma and Jake? Their children, 19 and 17 respectively, were both away at the moment. Emma was finishing her sophomore year at State University, while Jake was on a school trip to Washington, D.C. Marcus had been grateful for the quiet house that morning, thinking it would give him and Victoria some rare alone time. Now he realized she had planned this conversation for precisely when the kids wouldn't be around to witness it. They're old enough to understand that sometimes people grow apart, Victoria said. Emma's practically an adult, and Jake will be in college next year. This is actually the perfect time for us to make this kind of change. Perfect timing, as if there was ever a perfect time to destroy a family. Marcus poured himself coffee with hands that trembled slightly. How long have you been thinking about this? Honestly, a while. Victoria set down her cup and crossed her arms. I've been feeling restless for months, maybe longer. I look at our life, at our routine, at the way we've settled into this predictable pattern, and I just feel suffocated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She began to pace the length of the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Do you remember what we used to talk about when we were young? We were going to travel the world together. We were going to take risks, start our own business, live boldly. What happened to those dreams, Marcus? We grew up, Marcus said quietly. We had children. We built a life. We built a prison. Victoria's voice carried a sharpness he had never heard before. We built a safe, comfortable, boring prison, and somewhere along the way, I started dying inside. Marcus felt a flash of anger break through his shock. A prison? This house, our family, our life together, that's a prison to you? Yes. The word was flat, final. I wake up every morning knowing exactly how my day will go. Coffee at 7, work by 8:30, home by 6, dinner, television, bed, rinse and repeat. Where's the passion in that? Where's the excitement? Where's the growth? There's peace in that, Marcus countered. There's security. There's love. There's love, yes, but it's the kind of love you have for a comfortable old sweater, familiar and safe and ultimately forgettable. Victoria stopped pacing and looked at him directly. I don't want to be comfortable anymore, Marcus. I want to feel alive. The conversation continued for another hour, circling around the same themes with increasing futility. Victoria had made up her mind, and nothing Marcus could say was going to change it. She wanted him to move out so she could have space to think. She wanted to explore her options. She wanted to see what else was out there for a successful, attractive woman in her late 40s. Marcus found himself agreeing to things he never imagined he would agree to. A trial separation, separate bank accounts, a custody arrangement that would give Victoria primary residence when Jake came home from his school trip. He moved through the conversation like a man in a dream, signing his name to the end of his marriage without fully understanding how he had gotten there. By noon, Victoria had left for what she claimed was a spa day with her sister, but Marcus suspected was actually a celebration of her newfound freedom. He sat alone in their kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of the morning's disaster: burnt pancakes, cold coffee, the newspaper Victoria had been reading before she dropped her bomb. He picked up the paper and found himself staring at an article about divorce rates among middle-aged couples. The headline read, "Gray Divorce: Why More Couples Are Splitting After 50." Below it was a sidebar about starting over and finding yourself in midlife. Marcus wondered if Victoria had been reading the same article that morning, taking notes for her speech about deserving better. The house felt different already, as if Victoria's decision had somehow altered the very air inside it. Marcus walked through the rooms they had shared for 15 years, looking at the furniture they had chosen together, the photographs that documented their life as a family, the small artifacts of shared experience that now seemed to mock his assumption that their marriage was solid. In their bedroom, he noticed things he had somehow missed before. Victoria's jewelry box, usually cluttered with the simple pieces he had given her over the years, now contained several expensive items he didn't recognize. Her closet, when he opened it, revealed clothes with tags from stores he knew they couldn't afford on their combined income. Her nightstand drawer, which he opened looking for aspirin, contained a new cell phone he had never seen her use. The evidence was subtle but undeniable. Victoria had been preparing for this separation for weeks, maybe months. She had been building a new life while he remained obliviously content with their old one. Marcus spent the rest of that Saturday packing a suitcase with enough clothes for a few days, though he had no idea where he was going to go. Their friends were mostly Victoria's friends now, couples from her work and the expensive gym she had joined. His own friendships had withered over the years, sacrificed to the demands of work and family. His parents lived across the country, and his brother was dealing with his own marital problems. He ended up at the Riverside Inn, a modest hotel near downtown that catered to business travelers and tourists. The room was clean, but impersonal, with beige walls and generic furniture that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and called Emma's dorm room, knowing she would want to hear about the separation from her rather than from her mother. "Dad?" Emma's voice was bright and happy, the voice of a young woman who still believed her parents' marriage was unshakable. "This is a surprise. Is everything okay?" Marcus had rehearsed several versions of this conversation during the drive to the hotel, but now that the moment had arrived, he found himself struggling for words. "Emma, honey, I need to tell you something important. Your mother and I have decided to separate for a while." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice much smaller than before. "Separate? Like divorce?" "We don't know yet. We're just taking some time apart to figure things out." Marcus hated how the words sounded, like corporate speak designed to obscure rather than explain. "But why? I thought you guys were happy. You never fight. You never argue about anything serious." Emma's confusion was palpable, and Marcus realized that his and Victoria's decision to keep their problems private had left their children completely unprepared for this moment. "Sometimes people just grow apart, sweetheart. It doesn't mean we love you and Jake any less. It doesn't change anything about our family, except where your mother and I live." That was a lie, of course. Everything was going to change. The family dinners, the holiday traditions, the assumption that home was a place where both parents would always be present. Everything was going to be different now, whether Marcus wanted it to be or not. Emma asked the questions he had expected. Where would he live? What would happen to the house? Whether there was any chance they might get back together. Marcus answered as honestly as he could, though the truth was he didn't know much more than she did. Victoria had made a unilateral decision about their future, and now they were all scrambling to understand what that meant. After hanging up with Emma, Marcus called Jake's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He left a message asking his son to call him back. then sat in the hotel room's single chair and stared out the window at the parking lot below. The next few weeks passed in a haze of logistical arrangements and emotional numbness. Marcus found a furnished apartment in a complex near his office, a sterile one-bedroom place that felt more like an extended-stay hotel than a home. He packed more of his belongings while Victoria was at work, carefully avoiding the shared spaces where they might run into each other. Victoria, for her part, seemed to bloom in his absence. When Marcus came by the house to collect more clothes, he found evidence of her social renaissance everywhere. Wine glasses in the sink that suggested entertaining. Restaurant receipts on the counter from places he knew she hadn't gone with him. A new energy in her appearance and demeanor that made her look younger and more vibrant than she had in years. She was polite during these encounters, even friendly, as if their 23-year marriage had been a business partnership that had simply run its course. She asked about his apartment, offered to help him find better furniture, suggested they go to couples counseling, even though they both knew she had no intention of working things out. Marcus began to suspect that Victoria's transformation wasn't entirely self-generated. The new clothes, the expensive jewelry, the confidence that seemed to radiate from her, all of it suggested outside influence. Someone was funding and encouraging her journey of self-discovery, and Marcus had a growing suspicion about who that might be. The confirmation came on a Thursday evening in late May, when Marcus drove past their house on his way home from work and saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway. A silver BMW with dealer plates, the kind of car driven by someone who traded up every few years and didn't worry about the payments. Marcus parked across the street and waited, telling himself he was just curious, not spying. 20 minutes later, the front door opened and Victoria emerged, laughing at something the man beside her had said. Marcus recognized him immediately. Derek Hoffman, Victoria's supervisor at the marketing agency. Derek was everything Marcus was not. Tall where Marcus was average height, athletic where Marcus was soft around the middle, expensively dressed where Marcus shopped at department stores. Marcus had met Derek several times at Victoria's company parties and had always found him to be the kind of man who made conversation feel like a performance. Derek talked about his weekend skiing trips, his vintage wine collection, his latest exotic vacation with the casual arrogance of someone who had never questioned whether he deserved the best of everything. Watching Derek kiss Victoria goodbye on the front porch of the house Marcus still paid half the mortgage on, everything suddenly made sense. Victoria didn't want to explore who she was outside of marriage, she wanted to explore who she could be with someone else. Someone who offered the excitement and ambition she claimed to be missing. Someone who drove a BMW and took vacations to places Marcus had only seen in travel magazines. Marcus sat in his car until Derek drove away and Victoria went back inside. Then he drove to his apartment and poured himself 3 fingers of the bourbon Emma had given him for his birthday. He sat on his rented couch in his rented apartment and tried to process the reality of his situation. His wife of 23 years was already seeing someone else. The separation she had framed as a period of self-discovery was actually a cover story for an affair that had probably been going on for months. She had manipulated him into leaving their home so she could play house with her boss, all while maintaining the fiction that she just needed space to figure out what she wanted. Marcus had always considered himself a man who avoided confrontation, someone who preferred to solve problems through patience and compromise rather than aggression. But sitting alone in that sterile apartment, surrounded by the fragments of his dismantled life, he felt something new stirring inside him. Not quite anger, not yet, but a cold, clear understanding that Victoria had played him for a fool. She had said she deserved better than him, and he had accepted that judgment like a man accepting a medical diagnosis. He had packed his bags and moved out and agreed to a separation because he believed her assessment of their marriage, believed that his comfortable, stable, loving approach to life was somehow inadequate. But watching Derek Hoffman kiss his wife on the porch of their family home, Marcus began to wonder if Victoria's definition of better was worth what she was willing to sacrifice to get it. He thought about Emma's confusion and Jake's hurt silence when he had finally reached his son to explain the separation. He thought about the 23 years of shared experiences that Victoria was apparently ready to discard for the promise of something more exciting. Most of all, he thought about the casual cruelty of the way she had handled their breakup. The timing, the manipulation, the lies about needing space when what she really needed was freedom to be with Derek without the inconvenience of a husband asking questions. Marcus finished his bourbon and made a decision. If Victoria wanted better than him, he was going to make sure she got exactly what she deserved. But first, he needed to understand the full scope of what she had been hiding from him. He pulled out his laptop and began to research Derek Hofflin. What he found was interesting. Very interesting indeed. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work and drove to the offices of Blackwood Investigations, a private detective agency he had found through an online search. The office was located in a converted warehouse downtown, and the investigator who met with him was a woman named Sarah Chen, who had the direct manner of someone who had seen every variety of human deception. "Cheating spouse?" she asked, after Marcus had explained his situation. "I think so, yes, but I want to be sure before I do anything about it." Marcus handed her the file he had prepared, with photographs, dates, and the license plate number of Derek's BMW. Sarah flipped through the materials with professional efficiency. "How long have you suspected?" "The separation was her idea, but now I'm wondering if she had help making that decision." Marcus felt strange discussing his marriage with a stranger, but also oddly relieved to be talking to someone who didn't know Victoria, who wouldn't be influenced by her charm or her version of events. Standard surveillance package runs about $1,500 for a week. That includes photographs, video if possible, documentation of meetings and activities. Most cases resolve pretty quickly. People having affairs tend to not be very careful about hiding it once they think they're in the clear. Marcus agreed to the fee and signed the contract. He left Sarah's office feeling like he had finally taken action instead of just reacting to Victoria's decisions. For the first time since the morning of the burnt pancakes, he felt like he had some measure of control over what happened next. The investigation took exactly 4 days. Sarah's report, delivered to Marcus at his apartment on a Wednesday evening, was thorough and devastating. Victoria and Derek had been meeting regularly for at least 3 months, usually at expensive restaurants and hotels around the city. The relationship was clearly sexual. The photographs Sarah had taken left no doubt about that. But more interesting was the financial component of their affair. Derek had been paying for Victoria's new wardrobe, her gym membership, her jewelry, even her car payments. In return, Victoria had been providing him with information about competing marketing agencies, client lists, and strategic plans that Derek had been using to advance his own career. The affair wasn't just personal, it was also professional, a calculated exchange of sex and information for money and advancement. Even more damaging was what Sarah had discovered about Derek himself. Far from being the successful executive he pretended to be, Derek was living beyond his means, financing his lifestyle through a combination of embezzled company funds and loans he had no realistic hope of repaying. His BMW was leased, his expensive apartment was 3 months behind on rent, and his vintage wine collection existed primarily in his imagination. Derek Hoffman wasn't the upgrade Victoria thought she was getting. He was a fraud, a man whose apparent success was built on theft and deception. And now Victoria was complicit in his schemes, whether she knew it or not. Marcus sat in his apartment reading Sarah's report and felt something crystallize inside him. Victoria had said she deserved better than him, and she was about to get exactly what she deserved, just not in the way she had expected. He picked up his phone and began making calls. The first call Marcus made was to his lawyer, Robert Hartley, who had handled the couple's estate planning years earlier. Robert listened to Marcus's summary of the situation with the careful attention of a man who had heard similar stories countless times before. "I need you to understand something before we proceed," Robert said after Marcus finished explaining about Victoria's affair and Derek's financial irregularities. "If you're thinking about using this information to hurt your wife, that's not going to serve your interests in the long run. Divorce proceedings work best when both parties can maintain some dignity." Marcus appreciated the advice, but Robert didn't understand what he was planning. "I'm not interested in hurting Victoria," he said carefully.
I'm interested in making sure she gets exactly what she's looking for.
The distinction was important to Marcus, though he doubted Robert would appreciate the subtlety. Victoria had made it clear that she wanted a different kind of life, with a different kind of man. Marcus was simply going to help her achieve that goal as completely as possible. His second call was to Amanda Morrison, Victoria's sister, who had always been the more practical of the two siblings. Amanda lived in Seattle with her husband and twin daughters, running a successful interior design business that had grown from a hobby into a six-figure enterprise. She had visited them the previous Christmas, and Marcus remembered her making subtle comments about Victoria's spending habits and her sudden interest in appearance. "Marcus, I was wondering when you'd call," Amanda said when she heard his voice. "Victoria told me about the separation, but her version of events seemed a little too convenient, if you know what I mean." "What did she tell you?" "That she needed space to rediscover herself, that you two had grown apart, the usual midlife crisis talking points." Amanda's voice carried a note of skepticism that Marcus found encouraging. But she also mentioned she'd been getting advice from someone at work about her options, and that struck me as odd. Since when does Victoria discuss personal matters with colleagues? Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Did she mention Derek Hoffman by name? No, but she did say her supervisor had been very supportive during this difficult time. She made it sound like professional guidance, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Amanda paused, and Marcus could hear her daughters playing in the background. "Marcus, are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "I'm telling you that Victoria's period of self-discovery has been heavily influenced by outside factors," Marcus said carefully, "and that those factors might not have her best interests at heart." Amanda was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was firm. "What do you need from me?" The question surprised Marcus. He had called Amanda partly to test his own perceptions, to see if Victoria's behavior looked as suspicious to her family as it did to him. He hadn't expected her to offer assistance. "I need to understand how long this has been going on," he said. "Victoria's spending patterns, her attitude changes, when she started talking about being unhappy. You know her better than anyone except me. When did you first notice something was different?" Amanda thought for a moment. "Honestly, last fall. She called me in October complaining about feeling trapped, saying she looked at your life together and felt like she was suffocating. At the time, I thought she was just going through a rough patch. Everyone does around that age." "What else?" "She started asking me about my business, about what it felt like to be financially independent. She wanted to know how I had built something of my own, how I managed the money side of things. She'd never shown interest in business before, so it struck me as strange." Amanda's voice grew more serious. "Marcus, there's something else. In December, she asked me if I knew any good divorce attorneys in your area. Said it was for a friend, but I'm not sure I believe that now." The timeline was becoming clearer. Victoria had been planning her exit from their marriage for months, possibly since the previous fall. The spontaneous decision she had presented to Marcus over burnt pancakes had actually been a carefully orchestrated campaign, complete with financial preparation and legal research. Marcus thanked Amanda and promised to keep her updated. His third call was to his son Jake, who had returned from his school trip the previous week to discover his parents' separation. Jake was staying at the house with Victoria, but Marcus could hear the confusion and anger in his 17-year-old voice whenever they spoke. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Jake said when Marcus called that evening. "Was Mom seeing someone else before you guys separated?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because she's been acting weird for months. Different clothes, different attitude, always on her phone. And now there's this guy Derek who keeps calling the house. She says he's just a friend from work, but the way she talks to him doesn't sound like work conversations." Marcus felt a mixture of pride and sadness at his son's perceptiveness. Jake had noticed what Marcus had missed, possibly because teenagers were naturally attuned to deception in ways that trusting spouses were not. "What do you think I should do?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about his son's perspective. "I think you should find out the truth," Jake said without hesitation. "If she's lying about this, what else has she been lying about? And if this Derek guy is the reason she wanted you to move out, then you deserve to know that."
The conversation with Jake crystallized something that had been building in Marcus's mind since he received Sarah Chen's report. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore. Victoria's deception was affecting their children, disrupting their sense of security and trust. Emma was struggling with her classes, calling home more frequently with anxiety about the family situation. Jake was angry and confused, caught between loyalty to both parents and his own need to understand what was happening. Victoria's pursuit of something better was creating collateral damage that she seemed unwilling or unable to acknowledge. The careful way she had orchestrated the separation, the lies she had told to justify her actions, the manipulation of Marcus's trust, all of it suggested someone who had prioritized her own desires above the well-being of their family. Marcus spent the rest of that week gathering information. He reviewed their joint credit card statements for the previous 6 months, noting charges at expensive restaurants, boutique clothing stores, and luxury hotels that he had never questioned at the time. Victoria had explained them as business expenses or treats she had given herself, and Marcus had been happy that she was taking better care of herself. Now he saw the pattern differently. Someone had been funding Victoria's transformation, and the timing corresponded exactly with what Sarah Chen had discovered about her relationship with Derek. The expensive dinners were dates, the clothing purchases were funded by Derek's embezzled money. The hotel charges were for afternoon encounters that Victoria had hidden under the guise of client meetings. Marcus also began monitoring Derek's social media presence, something he had never thought to do before. Derek's Instagram account was a carefully curated showcase of affluence, photos from expensive restaurants, shots of luxury cars, images of weekend getaways to mountain resorts and beachside hotels. But when Marcus looked more carefully, he noticed subtle inconsistencies. The expensive restaurants were often photographed from angles that obscured the table settings, making it impossible to tell if Derek was dining alone or with company. The luxury cars appeared to be different vehicles in different photos, suggesting rentals rather than ownership. The weekend getaways were documented with professional quality photos that looked like they had been downloaded from travel websites rather than taken personally. Derek Hoffman's social media presence was as much a fabrication as his financial stability. He was selling an image of success to attract partners like Victoria, women who were looking for something better than their current situations and were willing to believe in the fantasy he presented. Marcus began to formulate a plan.
If Victoria wanted better than him, and if Derek was offering her a lifestyle built on lies and theft, then Marcus was going to help her experience that lifestyle fully. But first, he needed to understand exactly how deep Derek's deception went. He arranged to meet Sarah Chen again the following Monday. This time, he wanted her to investigate Derek's financial situation more thoroughly. The preliminary report had revealed embezzlement and unpaid debts, but Marcus needed specifics. He wanted to know how much Derek had stolen, from whom, and how long he could maintain his current spending patterns before the fraud was discovered. Sarah's expanded investigation took 2 weeks and cost Marcus an additional $3,000. The results were even more damning than he had expected. Derek had been stealing from his company for nearly 2 years, diverting client payments into personal accounts and manipulating expense reports to fund his lifestyle. The total amount was approaching 6 figures, and Derek had been getting increasingly desperate to cover his tracks as the company's accounting department began asking questions. More interesting was what Sarah discovered about Derek's relationship history. Victoria was not his first affair with a married colleague. Derek had a pattern of targeting women in committed relationships, promising them excitement and financial security, then discarding them when the relationships became too complicated or expensive to maintain. His previous affair had been with a woman named Linda Chen, a marketing director at his former company. Derek had convinced Linda to leave her husband and children, then abandoned her when she became too demanding of his time and money. Linda had ended up divorced and financially ruined, while Derek had simply moved to a different company and started the pattern over again. Marcus realized that Victoria was not Derek's partner in a grand romance. She was his current mark, a woman with resources and connections that Derek could exploit until he found someone more useful or less complicated. The expensive gifts, the promises of a better life, the encouragement to leave her marriage, All of it was part of a calculated seduction designed to extract maximum benefit from Victoria's situation. Armed with this information, Marcus began to craft his response. He couldn't simply expose Derek's fraud to Victoria because she was too emotionally invested to listen to reason. She would dismiss any evidence Marcus presented as the desperate lies of a rejected husband trying to win her back. Instead, Marcus decided to let Derek expose himself. He would create conditions that would force Derek to reveal his true character in ways that Victoria couldn't ignore or rationalize away. The plan began with a phone call to Derek's company, Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Marcus posed as a potential client looking to hire the agency for a major project. He spoke to Derek directly, explaining that he represented a group of investors interested in launching a new restaurant chain in the region. Derek's enthusiasm was immediate and overwhelming. He scheduled a meeting for the following week, promising Marcus that Pinnacle could handle every aspect of the marketing campaign. He talked about his personal connections in the restaurant industry, his experience with large-scale launches, his company's track record with similar projects. Marcus recorded the conversation, noting every exaggeration and false claim Derek made. The man was clearly desperate for a major client, someone who could provide the kind of income that would allow him to maintain his lifestyle without continuing to steal from his current accounts. The meeting took place at Derek's office, a sleek space in a downtown high-rise that projected exactly the kind of success Derek wanted his clients to believe in. Marcus arrived dressed in his best suit, carrying a briefcase filled with fake documents and promotional materials he had created for his fictitious restaurant concept. Derek's presentation was polished and professional, but Marcus could see the desperation underneath. Derek quoted inflated prices for services that Marcus knew were standard in the industry. He name-dropped clients and projects that Marcus suspected were either exaggerated or entirely fictional. Most tellingly, Derek pushed hard for an immediate commitment, claiming that his schedule was filling up rapidly and that Marcus would need to sign a contract that day to secure Pinnacle services. Marcus played the interested but cautious investor, asking detailed questions about timelines, deliverables, and costs. He could see Derek growing more anxious as the meeting progressed, clearly hoping for a quick close that would provide immediate cash flow. "I'll need to discuss this with my partners," Marcus said finally, gathering his fake documents. Derek's disappointment was palpable, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Of course, I understand, but I do want to emphasize that opportunities like this don't come along often. My company has a unique approach to restaurant marketing that could really make the difference between success and failure." Marcus promised to be in touch and left the office feeling satisfied with the groundwork he had laid. Derek was now expecting a major client who didn't exist, which would put additional pressure on his already precarious financial situation. The next phase of Marcus's plan involved Emma. His daughter had called the previous weekend, upset about a conversation she had with Victoria about the separation. Victoria had been pushing Emma to take sides, suggesting that Marcus was being unreasonable about the terms of their separation and that Emma should encourage him to be more cooperative. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening," Emma had said. "Mom keeps saying you're making things difficult, but you seem like you're trying to be fair about everything. Is there something I don't know?" Marcus had been careful not to criticize Victoria directly, but he could see that Emma was beginning to form her own opinions about her mother's behavior. The way Victoria was handling the separation, the lies about Derek, the manipulation of the children's loyalties, the revisionist history about their marriage, was gradually revealing her true character to their daughter. Marcus arranged for Emma to come home for a weekend visit, ostensibly to collect some belongings from her room, but actually to witness Victoria's relationship with Derek firsthand. He didn't tell Emma what to expect. He simply suggested she might want to spend some time at the house when Victoria wasn't expecting her. Emma's discovery happened exactly as Marcus had hoped. She arrived at the house on a Saturday afternoon using her key, assuming Victoria was out running errands. Instead, she walked in to find Victoria and Derek in a compromising position on the living room couch, surrounded by expensive wine bottles and takeout containers from the restaurant where Marcus had once proposed to Victoria.
Emma called Marcus from her car 20 minutes later, her voice shaking with anger and disappointment. "Dad, you were right. There is something I didn't know. Mom's been lying to all of us." The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Emma had questions about the timeline of the affair, about whether Derek was the reason for the separation, about how long Marcus had known the truth. Marcus answered as honestly as he could without going into details that might further hurt his daughter. "What are you going to do about it?" Emma asked. "I'm going to give your mother exactly what she's been asking for," Marcus said. "She wants a different kind of life, with a different kind of man. I'm going to make sure she gets the full experience." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Dad, are you planning something?" "I'm planning to let the truth reveal itself," Marcus said carefully. "Your mother has made her choices based on incomplete information. Once she has all the facts, she can make better decisions about what she really wants." The final piece of Marcus's plan involved Derek's employer. Sarah Chen's investigation had uncovered enough evidence of embezzlement to interest law enforcement, but Marcus wanted to give Derek one more opportunity to expose himself before involving the authorities. He called Pinnacle Marketing Solutions and asked to speak with Derek's supervisor, a woman named Patricia Wells who had been with the company for over a decade. Marcus identified himself as a concerned citizen who had information about potential fraud within the company. Patricia was initially skeptical, but she agreed to meet with Marcus after he provided specific details about discrepancies in client accounts that only someone with inside knowledge could have discovered. The meeting took place at a coffee shop near Patricia's office, and Marcus brought copies of the financial records Sarah had obtained through her investigation. Patricia's reaction was immediate and decisive. "We've been noticing irregularities for months," she told Marcus. "Small things at first, expense reports that didn't quite add up, client payments that seemed delayed, projects that cost more than they should have. But Derek always had explanations, and his sales numbers were strong enough that we didn't want to rock the boat." "The evidence suggests this has been going on for nearly 2 years," Marcus said, sliding the financial records across the table. Patricia studied the documents with growing alarm. "This is much worse than we suspected."
If these numbers are accurate, Derek has stolen over $100,000 from client accounts. We could lose our business license over something like this. What are you going to do about it? "We're going to conduct a full audit immediately," Patricia said, "and depending on what we find, we may need to involve law enforcement. This kind of fraud is a felony." Marcus left the meeting knowing that Derek's time was running out. The audit would reveal the full extent of his theft, and criminal charges would follow shortly after. Derek's carefully constructed image of success was about to collapse, taking Victoria's dreams of a better life down with it. But Marcus wasn't finished. He wanted Victoria to understand not just that Derek was a fraud, but that her own judgment had been compromised by greed and selfishness. She needed to see how her pursuit of something better had led her to someone who was actually much worse than the husband she had discarded. Marcus spent the next week putting the finishing touches on his plan. He arranged for Jake to stay with Emma at her dorm for the weekend, giving Victoria the privacy she thought she wanted with Derek. He prepared a series of revelations that would unfold over the course of 48 hours, each one designed to strip away another layer of the illusion Victoria had been living. The plan would begin with Derek's arrest for embezzlement, which Patricia Wells had confirmed would happen the following Friday. Victoria would learn about Derek's crimes at the same time as everyone else in their social circle, making it impossible for her to minimize or rationalize his behavior. But that was just the beginning. Marcus had also arranged for Victoria to discover Derek's pattern of relationships with married women, his history of financial deception, and the real reason he had been so interested in her marriage and her access to Marcus's stable income. By the end of the weekend, Victoria would have the complete picture of the man she had chosen over her family. She would understand that Derek had never seen her as a partner or a lover, but as a mark to be exploited until something better came along. Marcus had spent months being the discarded husband, the man who wasn't good enough for his wife's elevated standards. But now, Victoria was going to learn exactly what good enough meant when it was stripped of pretense and manipulation. She had said she deserved better than Marcus. By Monday morning, she was going to understand precisely what she actually deserved and what she had given up to get it. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his plan to expose Derek's deception required a certain amount of deception on his own part. But he told himself that there was a difference between lying to hurt someone and revealing lies that were already causing damage. Victoria's relationship with Derek was built on fraud and manipulation. Marcus was simply accelerating the timeline of its inevitable collapse. On Thursday evening, Marcus sat in his apartment reviewing the details of what would happen the next day. Patricia Wells would arrive at Derek's office with an auditor and 2 police officers. Derek would be arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. His assets would be frozen, his access to company accounts terminated, his carefully maintained lifestyle brought to an immediate end. Victoria would receive a phone call from Derek's secretary, explaining that he had been taken into custody and would not be available for their planned weekend together. She would then have to decide whether to believe that the man she had left her family for was actually a criminal, or whether this was somehow an elaborate scheme orchestrated by her bitter ex-husband. Marcus suspected that Victoria's first instinct would be to blame him. She would assume that he had fabricated evidence or manipulated the situation to hurt Derek and force her back into their marriage. The idea that she had been deceived by Derek, that her judgment had been so thoroughly compromised, would be too painful to accept immediately. But the evidence would be undeniable. Derek's arrest would be followed by news coverage of the embezzlement case. His victims would come forward to tell their stories. His pattern of deception would become public knowledge, making it impossible for Victoria to maintain her illusions about his character or his motives. Marcus found himself thinking about the morning when this had all started, when Victoria had stood in their kitchen and told him he wasn't good enough for her anymore. He remembered the casual cruelty of the way she had delivered that verdict, the assumption that he would simply accept her assessment and step aside for someone better. At the time, Marcus had believed her. He had accepted that his comfortable, stable approach to life was somehow inadequate, that Victoria's restlessness and dissatisfaction were reasonable responses to his shortcomings as a husband. He had packed his bags and moved out because he thought he owed her the freedom to find whatever she was looking for. Now he understood that Victoria's dissatisfaction hadn't been about him at all. It had been about her own desires for a different kind of life, desires that had made her vulnerable to Derek's manipulation and lies. She hadn't left Marcus because he was inadequate. She had left him because Derek had convinced her that she could have something better. The tragedy was that she actually could have had something better, just not with Derek. If Victoria had been honest about her feelings, if she had worked with Marcus to address their problems instead of having an affair, they might have been able to rebuild their marriage into something stronger and more fulfilling. Instead, Victoria has chosen deception and betrayal, and now she was going to experience the consequences of that choice. Marcus wasn't taking revenge on his wife, he was simply ensuring that she received exactly what she had asked for. Tomorrow, Victoria's education would begin. Part 3. The Reckoning. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharp and clear. Marcus woke in his sterile apartment before his alarm, dressed in his best suit, and drove to his office with the calm focus of a man who had been preparing for this day for weeks. He had told his colleagues he would be working from home, but instead, he positioned himself at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, where he could monitor the news feeds on his laptop while staying close enough to witness Derek's downfall firsthand. The arrest happened at exactly 9:15, just as Patricia Wells had promised. Marcus watched through the coffee shop window as 2 police cruisers pulled up outside the glass tower that housed Derek's office. He opened his laptop and refreshed the local news websites, waiting for the story to break. By 10:30, the first reports appeared online. "Local marketing executive arrested for embezzlement," read the headline on Channel 7's website. The article was brief but damning. Derek Hoffman, age 42, had been charged with stealing over $120,000 from client accounts at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. The investigation had revealed a pattern of fraud spanning nearly 2 years, involving falsified expense reports, diverted client payments, and unauthorized use of company credit cards.
Marcus screenshot the article and forwarded it to his phone, then settled back to wait for Victoria's reaction. He didn't have to wait long. His phone rang at 11:05. Victoria's number appeared on the screen, and Marcus could hear the panic in her voice before she even spoke. "Marcus, I need to talk to you. Can you come to the house?" "I'm at work, Victoria. What's this about?" "It's about Derek. Something's happened, and I think you might have had something to do with it." Her voice was strained, caught between anger and desperation. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said calmly. "What's happened to Derek?" "He's been arrested for embezzlement. The police came to his office this morning and took him away in handcuffs." Victoria's words came out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly might somehow make them less true. Marcus allowed himself a moment of silence, as if processing this surprising news. "That's terrible, Victoria. I'm sorry to hear it." "Don't pretend you don't know anything about this," Victoria snapped. "This is too convenient to be a coincidence. You've been investigating him, haven't you?" "Victoria, I think you're giving me too much credit. I'm an accountant, not a detective. If Derek has been stealing money from his company, that's between him and the police."
I know you, Marcus. I know how your mind works. You found out about Derek and me, and you decided to destroy him. Marcus could hear the fear underneath her anger, the growing realization that her carefully planned new life was collapsing around her. Victoria, if you're having a relationship with someone who's been arrested for fraud, that's not my fault. That's your choice in men. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. "Can you just come to the house, please? I need to understand what's happening." Marcus agreed to meet her, though he waited until after lunch to make the drive to Millbrook Heights. He wanted Victoria to spend a few hours alone with the news, letting the reality of Derek's situation sink in before they had their conversation. The house looked the same from the outside, but Marcus could sense the chaos within as soon as Victoria opened the door. She had clearly been crying, and her usual immaculate appearance was disheveled. She wore sweatpants and an old college t-shirt that Marcus recognized from their early years together, as if she had unconsciously reached for clothing that represented security and familiarity. "Come in," she said quietly, leading him to the living room where she had been entertaining Derek just days earlier. "I've been reading about the charges online. They're saying he stole over $100,000. Marcus sat down across from her, noting the expensive wine bottles and takeout containers that were still scattered around the room. Evidence of Victoria's new lifestyle, now suddenly tainted by the knowledge of how it had been funded. "Do you believe it?" Marcus asked. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, looking suddenly vulnerable in a way Marcus hadn't seen since their children were small. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Derek told me he was successful, that he could provide the kind of life I wanted, but now they're saying he was stealing money to pay for everything." "Everything, including your expenses?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. She stared at Marcus with dawning horror, beginning to understand the implications of Derek's crimes. "You think he was using stolen money on me?" "Victoria, where did you think the money was coming from? The expensive dinners, the jewelry, the clothes, the hotel rooms? Derek's salary couldn't have covered all of that, especially not while he was maintaining his own lifestyle." Victoria stood up abruptly and began pacing the length of the living room, her movements quick and agitated. "He said he had investments, savings from previous jobs. He said he worked hard for his success and deserved to enjoy it." "And you believed him?" "Why wouldn't I believe him?" Victoria's voice rose with defensive anger. "He showed me his apartment, his car, his clothes. Everything about him suggested he was successful." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Victoria the screenshots he had saved from Sarah Chen's investigation. His apartment is 3 months behind on rent. His car is leased and about to be repossessed. His expensive clothes were bought with company credit cards. Derek Hoffman wasn't successful, Victoria. He was a thief. Victoria sank back into her chair, staring at the evidence on Marcus's phone. "How long have you known about this?" "I suspected something was wrong when I saw you two together, so I hired a private investigator to find out the truth." "You had me followed?" Victoria's anger flared again, but it lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "I had Derek investigated. You were just part of the story." Marcus put his phone away and looked at his wife directly. "Victoria, you said you deserved better than me. You said you wanted someone who matched your energy and ambition. Did Derek match your energy, or did he just match your willingness to believe what you wanted to hear?" The question hung in the air between them while Victoria struggled to formulate an answer. Marcus could see her trying to reconcile the Derek she thought she knew with the Derek who had been arrested for embezzlement, trying to find a way to preserve some dignity from the wreckage of her judgment. "Even if Derek made mistakes, that doesn't mean my feelings weren't real," she said finally. "That doesn't mean our marriage was working. Our marriage was working fine until you decided it wasn't," Marcus replied. "The problems you complained about, the routine, the predictability, the lack of excitement, those weren't problems with our relationship. Those were problems with your expectations." Victoria stood up again, this time moving to the window that overlooked their backyard. The garden she had once loved was beginning to show signs of neglect, the flowers she had planted in the spring now withered and brown. "You don't understand what it's like," she said without turning around. "Waking up every day to the same routine, the same conversations, the same predictable life. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible." "So you decided to have an affair with a criminal?" "I didn't know he was a criminal." Victoria spun around, her eyes blazing with frustration. "I thought he was offering me a chance at something better, something more exciting than what we had." "And what we had wasn't enough for you?" Victoria's anger deflated as quickly as it had risen. She looked around the room, at the evidence of her affair, at the comfortable home she had been so eager to leave behind, at the husband she had dismissed as inadequate. "No," she said quietly, "it wasn't enough. But maybe I was wrong about what enough meant." Marcus felt a mixture of sadness and vindication at her admission. "Victoria, Derek didn't choose you because you were special or exciting or deserving of something better. He chose you because you were married to someone with a stable income and assets he could eventually access. You weren't his girlfriend, you were his retirement plan." The words hit Victoria like a slap. She stared at Marcus with growing comprehension, finally beginning to understand the full scope of how she had been manipulated. "That's not true," she whispered, but Marcus could see that she was starting to believe it might be. Marcus pulled out another document from his briefcase, one of Sarah Chen's reports about Derek's pattern of targeting married women. Derek's previous affair was with a woman named Linda. Married, financially secure, unhappy with her routine life. He convinced her to leave her husband and children, then abandoned her when she became too demanding. Linda lost everything: her marriage, her home, her relationship with her children. Derek moved on to his next target without looking back. Victoria read the report in silence, her face growing paler with each paragraph. When she finished, she set the document down and covered her face with her hands. "I'm such a fool," she said through her fingers. "I threw away our marriage for a man who was using me." Marcus felt no satisfaction in her distress. Despite everything Victoria had done, despite the pain she had caused their family, he took no pleasure in watching her confront the consequences of her choices. "Victoria, Derek didn't destroy our marriage. You did that when you decided to have an affair instead of working on our problems together." She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Can we fix this, Marcus? Can we try again?" The question Marcus had been dreading. He had spent so much energy planning Derek's exposure, orchestrating Victoria's education about the man she had chosen over their family, that he hadn't fully considered what would happen afterward. "I don't know," he said honestly. "A lot of damage has been done. Emma knows about the affair. Jake knows you lied to him about Derek being just a friend from work. They've seen how you were willing to disrupt their lives for someone who turned out to be a fraud." Victoria's face crumpled at the mention of their children. "Do they hate me?" "They're hurt and confused. They trusted you to make good decisions for our family, and instead, you made decisions based on what you wanted rather than what was best for everyone." Marcus stood up and walked to the same window Victoria had been looking out, surveying the backyard where their children had played, where they had hosted birthday parties and barbecues,
where they had built a life together over more than 2 decades. Victoria, you said you deserved better than me. Maybe you did. But you also deserved better than Derek, and you were too blinded by the fantasy he was selling to see that. Victoria joined him at the window, standing close enough that he could smell the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the salt of dried tears. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you get exactly what you asked for," Marcus said. "You wanted freedom from our predictable life? You have it. You wanted excitement and unpredictability? Derek's criminal trial should provide plenty of both. You wanted to be with someone who matched your ambition? Well, Derek was certainly ambitious, even if his ambitions were illegal." Victoria flinched at the harsh assessment, but she didn't argue with it. "Marcus, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but is there any chance you could forgive me? Not today, maybe not for a long time, but someday?" Marcus considered the question carefully. The woman standing beside him was still his wife, still the mother of his children, still someone he had loved for more than half his adult life. But she was also someone who had been willing to lie to him, manipulate him, and discard their marriage for the promise of something better with a man she barely knew. "I might be able to forgive you eventually," he said, "but I don't think I can trust you again. And without trust, there's no foundation for a marriage." Victoria nodded, accepting his judgment with the same resignation she had shown when reading about Derek's crimes. "What about the children?" "The children will make their own decisions about their relationship with you. Emma is old enough to understand what happened and form her own opinions. Jake is getting there. You'll need to earn back their respect and trust, assuming that's even possible." They stood in silence for several minutes, looking out at the garden that had once represented their shared investment in their home and future. Marcus found himself thinking about all the Saturday mornings he had spent out there, planting flowers Victoria had chosen, building the life she had ultimately decided wasn't good enough. "I should go," he said finally. "I have some decisions to make about what comes next." Victoria walked him to the door, her steps slow and heavy. "Marcus, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just about getting caught, but about all of it. About hurting you and the kids, about throwing away what we had." Marcus paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Victoria, the tragedy isn't that you threw away what we had. The tragedy is that you threw it away for something that was never real in the first place." He left her standing in the doorway of the house they had shared, looking smaller and more lost than he had ever seen her. As he drove back to his apartment, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened since that morning with the burnt pancakes. Victoria had gotten exactly what she said she deserved. She had chosen Derek over Marcus, excitement over stability, the promise of something better over the reality of something good. Now she was facing the consequences of those choices. A lover in jail, children who questioned her judgment, a marriage destroyed by her own actions. The irony was that Victoria actually did deserve better than Derek Hoffman. She had deserved honesty instead of manipulation, genuine success instead of stolen money, real love instead of calculated seduction. But she had been so focused on escaping what she saw as the limitations of her life with Marcus that she had made herself vulnerable to someone who offered her exactly what she thought she wanted. Marcus spent the weekend in his apartment, fielding phone calls from Emma and Jake as they processed the news about Derek's arrest. Emma was angry but not surprised. She had sensed something dishonest about Derek from their brief encounter at the house. Jake was more confused, struggling to understand how his mother could have made such a fundamental error in judgment about someone's character. "Dad, are you going to get back together with Mom?" Jake asked. Marcus had been dreading the question, partly because he wasn't sure of the answer himself. "I don't think so, son. Too much has happened for us to go back to the way things were." "But she's sorry now. She knows she made a mistake." "Being sorry and making a mistake are two different things, Jake. Your mother didn't accidentally have an affair with Derek. She made a series of deliberate choices over several months, choices that she knew would hurt our family. The fact that Derek turned out to be a criminal doesn't change the fact that she was willing to leave us for him." Jake was quiet for a moment. So you're going to get divorced? Probably.
But that doesn't change anything about how much I love you and Emma, or how much we're both going to be involved in your lives. The conversation was painful but necessary. Marcus had no interest in poisoning his children's relationship with their mother, but he also wasn't going to pretend that Victoria's actions hadn't had real consequences for their family. On Monday morning, Marcus received a call from Patricia Wells at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Derek's arrest had triggered a comprehensive audit of the company's finances, and the damage was even more extensive than initially suspected. "We're going to have to contact every client Derek worked with over the past 2 years," Patricia explained. "Some of them may have legal claims against our company if their money was misused. We're looking at potential bankruptcy." Marcus felt a pang of sympathy for Derek's innocent colleagues who were now facing unemployment because of his crimes. What about Derek himself? What kind of sentence is he looking at? The prosecutor is talking about 5 to 7 years, possibly more if additional charges are filed. Financial fraud at this level is a serious felony. Marcus thanked Patricia for the update and hung up, considering what this meant for Victoria. Her lover was likely going to prison for the better part of a decade. The money he had spent on their relationship was stolen, making Victoria an unwitting accessory to his crimes. The lifestyle he had promised her was built on a foundation of lies and theft. Victoria had said she deserved better than Marcus, and now she was getting precisely what she deserved: the full consequences of choosing Derek over her family. That afternoon, Marcus met with Robert Hartley to begin divorce proceedings. The conversation was businesslike and efficient, focused on asset division, custody arrangements, and the timeline for finalizing their separation. "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked as Marcus signed the initial paperwork. "Victoria's obviously going through a difficult time right now. This might not be the best moment to make permanent decisions about your marriage." Marcus had considered the same question over the weekend. Victoria was clearly devastated by Derek's arrest and the revelation of his true character. She was vulnerable and regretful, possibly more open to reconciliation than she had been in months. But Marcus had also spent that weekend thinking about trust, about the foundation required for a healthy marriage, about the kind of relationship he wanted for the remaining decades of his life. "Robert, Victoria didn't just have an affair. She systematically deceived me for months, manipulated our children, and was willing to destroy our family for someone she barely knew. The fact that Derek turned out to be a criminal doesn't change the fact that Victoria was prepared to leave us for him." Robert nodded, understanding the distinction Marcus was making. "So you want to proceed with the divorce?" "I want to proceed with the divorce." Marcus left Robert's office feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. The sadness was for the end of a marriage that had once been genuinely happy, for the family traditions that would now be divided between two households, for the shared future he and Victoria had planned but would never experience. The relief was for the end of uncertainty, for the knowledge that he would no longer have to wonder if his wife was lying to him, for the freedom to build a new life based on honesty and mutual respect. Over the following weeks, Marcus watched from a distance as Victoria's new reality took shape. Derek was denied bail and remained in jail awaiting trial. The expensive apartment Victoria had admired was repossessed by the leasing company. The BMW Derek had driven to their house was seized by police as evidence in his financial crimes. Victoria had to find a new job when Pinnacle Marketing Solutions folded under the weight of Derek's embezzlement. She moved from their house in Millbrook Heights to a modest apartment across town, taking only the belongings that had been hers before their marriage. Emma and Jake maintained relationships with both parents, but Marcus could see that their trust in Victoria's judgment had been permanently damaged. They were polite but distant with their mother, protective of their father in ways they had never been before. Marcus, meanwhile, began the process of rebuilding his own life. He bought a small house near downtown, closer to his office, to the restaurants and cultural venues he had always enjoyed but rarely visited during his marriage. He reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies he had abandoned years earlier, and discovered that life as a single man in his 50s offered possibilities he hadn't considered. 6 months after Derek's arrest, Marcus ran into Victoria at a coffee shop near their children's high school. She was waiting for Jake after one of his soccer games, and Marcus was surprised by how much she had changed. The expensive clothes and jewelry were gone, replaced by simple, practical outfits that Marcus remembered from their early years together. She had lost weight, but not in the healthy way she had during her affair with Derek. Instead, she looked tired and worn, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "Hello, Marcus," she said when she noticed him in line behind her. "Victoria, how are you doing?" She shrugged, a gesture that conveyed more than words could have. "I'm managing. Jake told me you bought a house downtown. Are you happy there?" "I am, actually. It's different from what I'm used to, but different in a good way." Victoria nodded, and Marcus could see her processing what he had said. Different in a good way. The opposite of what she had sought in her relationship with Derek. "Marcus, I know this is probably pointless to say, but I want you to know that I understand now what I gave up. Not just our marriage, but the security of being with someone I could trust completely." Marcus appreciated the acknowledgement, even if it came too late to change anything. "I hope you find that again someday, Victoria, with someone who deserves your trust and gives yours in return." They parted cordially. Two people who had once shared everything and now shared only a history and concern for their children's well-being. As Marcus drove home to his new house, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. Victoria had said she deserved better than him, and in a way, she had been right. She deserved better than the comfortable, predictable life they had built together. But she also deserved better than Derek Hoffman, better than the lies and manipulation that had characterized their affair, better than the criminal who had exploited her dissatisfaction for his own gain. The tragedy was that Victoria had been so focused on escaping what she saw as the limitations of her marriage that she had run straight into something far worse. In seeking better, she had found worse. In pursuing excitement, she had found deception. In looking for someone to match her ambition, she had found someone whose ambitions were fundamentally corrupt. Marcus had given Victoria exactly what she said she deserved: the full experience with Derek Hoffman, complete with criminal charges, financial ruin, and public humiliation. But he took no satisfaction in her suffering, because her punishment was ultimately self-imposed, the natural consequence of choices she had made with full knowledge of what she was risking. Victoria had deserved better than Marcus, and she had deserved better than Derek. What she had gotten instead was exactly what her choices had earned her: the knowledge that sometimes the grass isn't greener on the other side. Sometimes it's just fertilized with lies. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.